Today, Brotherly brings a mind-bending Korean suspense horror film, The Wailing. It's said that even the director was bewildered after making this film. I will provide a detailed analysis at the end. Those who have watched it can skip to the last section. Let's first take a brief look at the plot. In a small village in a part of Korea, an incident occurs. How many cases are there? The first case, a man covered in sores sits blankly in front of the door. The man's wife was stabbed over 20 times, lying in a pool of blood, and the daughter, in front of the door, hangs a bundle of withered snapdragons. The suspect was sent to the hospital for treatment. The second murder case, a crazed woman killed her entire family and set fire to the bodies to cover up the crime. Then she hanged herself from the crooked neck tree at the entrance of the village. Several murder cases occurred. A man killed his entire family, threw the bodies into a well, and then died in his car. The common link among the perpetrators of these murders was that they had sores all over their bodies and were in a confused state of mind. A series of murder cases happening in a small village is an absolutely sensational event locally, and the police are taking it very seriously. Jang-gu and his colleague Oh Sung-bak are ultimately in charge of investigating these cases. After many days of interviews and investigations, they learn that these cases might be related to a Japanese person who has lived there for 3 years. Since this Japanese person arrived, strange events have been occurring in the village one after another. Additionally, they heard from a villager that he personally saw the Japanese man seemingly transform into a monster with blood-red eyes. This leads Jang-gu and Oh Sung-bak to investigate the Japanese man's residence. Midway through the journey, the originally clear sky suddenly pours down heavy rain, and the villager therewith is struck by lightning. Twice after Jang-gu sends the villager to the hospital, he witnesses the suspect from the first murder case die violently, in a very tragic state. When Jang-gu returns home, he finds his daughter, Hyo-jin, convulsing uncontrollably, her body thrashing. After much effort, she calms down, and Jang-gu learns from her that she had seen the Japanese man before. Furthermore, at the scene of the second murder case, there was a woman in white, and she also told Jang-gu that the Japanese man was a ghost. All signs pointed toward the Japanese man. Jang-gu decided to focus the investigation on the Japanese person, but since all these events were too bizarre, even the usually skeptical Jang-gu felt uncertain. He enlisted the help of the local Catholic priest's acolyte, Yang I-sam, to accompany him to the Japanese person's residence. Yang I-sam is Sung-bak's nephew and had spent a few years in Japan, so he could act as a translator. Upon arriving at the Japanese person's mountain cabin, they found that he was not home. They discovered a white mask in a package, and the most terrifying thing was that they found an altar in a small room. The walls were covered with photos of the recent murderers in the village, and they even found Hyo-jin's shoes. Just as the three were in shock, the Japanese man returned. Calmly, he glanced at the photos in the room and stared silently at the three, causing their skin to crawl. They awkwardly fled from the scene. I find it hard to understand this part. You're a police officer, why would you run? Eventually, upon returning home, Jang-gu sees his daughter becoming increasingly abnormal, shouting loudly at him. Sores also started appearing on her body. Realizing the seriousness of the matter, he becomes desperate to find a way to prevent his daughter from ending up like the deranged criminals. He quickly finds Yang I-sam, and they return to the Japanese man's residence, where they kill the dog he kept as a warning for him to leave the village. Otherwise, his fate would be as miserable as the dog's. The Japanese man, still calm, shows no fear. He sits in front of his door as a few crows fly into the house to feast on the dog's corpse. He remains there until nightfall, his lips trembling slightly. The next day, a dead goat is found hanging in front of Jang-gu's house. He, crushed by the pressure, is taken to a clinic by his wife and mother-in-law. After regaining his senses, Jang-gu asks where Hyo-jin is, and his wife says she had temporarily left her with the grandmother next door. Upon hearing this, Jang-gu immediately rushes home. How could they entrust Hyo-jin to someone else with everything going on? When they arrive, they find the grandmother lying in a pool of blood, and Hyo-jin sitting nearby, pale and holding scissors. All signs now indicate that the Japanese man knows some witchcraft. Following the advice of his mother-in-law, Jang-gu decides to invite the famous shaman Il-gwang to perform a ritual. Although it costs 10 million Korean won, Jang-gu agrees for the sake of his daughter. After inspecting the surroundings, the shaman finds a crow's corpse in a kitchen jar and declares that the Japanese man is a ghost orchestrating the murders. The family, now believing this, begins preparations to protect themselves. Meanwhile, the Japanese person is found in a car with the body of the third murder suspect. At the same time, time, Il Guang and his assistant perform the ritual at Jong-goo's house. Although this is a horror film, the shaman's dance is unexpectedly comedic. As the ritual progresses, Hyojin convulses violently, letting out heart-wrenching screams, appearing extremely distressed. Meanwhile, the Japanese man is performing his own ritual, and the corpse in the car starts moving. Seeing his daughter in such pain, Jong-goo can't bear it anymore. At Hyojin's pleading, he interrupts the ritual, believing it might be causing her suffering. The next day, Jong-goo goes to the church to ask for help, but the priest tells him there's nothing he can do. Desperate, Jong-goo gathers a group of villagers, including Songbok and Yang Yi-sam, and prepares to confront the Japanese man. Sensing danger, the Japanese man escapes before they arrive, but they find the remnants of his ritual in his home. As the group searches the area, they encounter a zombie-like figure, presumably the corpse from the car, brought back to life by the Japanese man's dark magic. The creature attacks anyone it sees and seems impervious to any strikes. However, it eventually collapses and dies violently. Just like the previous murder suspects, the group spots the Japanese man hiding nearby and chases after him. He flees to a cliff, but just as they think they've cornered him, they see the woman in white standing in the distance. Frightened, the Japanese man runs again but is thrown off the cliff, seemingly by the woman in white. When the group returns home, Jong-goo believes the Japanese man's death has put an end to the curse. His daughter Hyojin seems to have returned to normal, and the family is relieved. However, things take a darker turn when Jong-goo's colleague Songbok succumbs to the same symptoms as the previous victims, covered in sores. He kills his own family. Clearly, the nightmare is far from over. Later, Il Guang calls Jong-goo, but Jong-goo, now distrustful, hangs up on him. Il Guang arrives at Jong-goo's house in person and encounters the woman in white. The woman sternly tells him to leave. Terrified, Il Guang stumbles away, vomiting in fear. As Il Guang leaves the village, his car is suddenly swarmed by moths, crashing into his windshield. He panics, but when he checks, the moths are gone. Realizing something, Il Guang turns his car around and heads back to the village, calling Jong-goo once more. This time, Il Guang warns Jong-goo that the woman in white is the real ghost and that the Japanese man was actually trying to protect the village from her. He urges Jong-goo to return home immediately to protect his daughter. Jong-goo, unsure of whom to trust, returns home in a panic. Meanwhile, Hyojin, holding a flashlight and a sickle, wanders to the spot where the Japanese man's body was discarded. She follows a strange light emanating from a nearby cave. As Jong-goo frantically searches for his daughter, he encounters the woman in white. She tells him that Hyojin is possessed by a ghost and warns him not to return home yet. She reveals that she had set a trap for the ghost, and if Jong-goo interrupts it by going home, his whole family will die. The woman in white urges Jong-goo to trust her and wait until the rooster crows 3 times, signifying the completion of her trap. Torn, Jong-goo hesitates. Meanwhile, Hyojin has already returned home, but she behaves strangely, eating voraciously and eyeing a nearby fruit knife. In the cave, Il Guang finally confronts the Japanese man. When Jong-goo asks if he is human or demon, the Japanese man confirms he is a demon. The Japanese man then begins taking pictures, just as he did with the earlier victims, sealing their fates. Back at Jong-goo's house, the rooster crows twice, but in his panic and disbelief, Jong-goo rushes home before the 3rd crow. The moment he arrives, the snapdragons at his doorstep wither, signaling that the trap has failed. Inside, he finds his wife lying in a pool of blood, and his daughter, now fully possessed, smiling eerily at him with a blank expression. Jong-goo collapses in despair, realizing too late that he should have trusted the woman in white. He had inadvertently doomed his family. In the final scene, Il Guang arrives at the house and sees Hyojin sitting at the door in the same posture as the suspect from the first murder case. Jong-goo lies lifeless on the ground, having lost everything. Il Guang takes a few photographs, similar to what the Japanese man did, before leaving. In a chilling twist, as Il Guang opens the trunk of his car, we see it contains photos identical to those found in the Japanese man's home, suggesting that Il Guang and the Japanese man were working together all along. The movie ends ambiguously, leaving the viewer with more questions than answers. A cut scene from the movie shows the Japanese man and Il Guang leaving the village together, revealing that the Japanese man is indeed a demon practicing black magic, while Il Guang is in it for the money, pretending to exorcise the evil spirits while covering up the atrocities. The woman in white is the vengeful spirit of a murdered villager turned guardian deity, trying to protect the village from the Japanese man's dark magic, but she is ultimately misunderstood and defeated. In conclusion, The Wailing is not just a supernatural horror film, it is also a commentary on Korea's history, specifically the period of Japanese occupation. The Japanese man represents Shinto, which suppressed local religions, while the woman in white symbolizes the oppressed people trying to resist. Shamanism, represented by Il Guang, is depicted as a self-serving entity willing to collaborate with darker forces for profit. The film delves into themes of fear, distrust, and the consequences of misjudgment. The director himself mentioned in interviews that even he felt confused after completing the film, likely due to the complexity and sensitivity of the subject matter. However, the movie's success and its ability to spark discussions prove that it achieved its intended effect, leaving viewers haunted and questioning what they just witnessed. If you enjoyed my analysis, feel free to share your thoughts, and let's continue the discussion.